George Landow from Little Rhody, please take it away.
Okay, this is modeling the Conklin Limestone project, which is sort of like a 20-year project. What you're seeing on the side, this is the model, which is like about 5 feet long. And so what we're going to look at is the Conklin Limestone Quarry in the 70s, and then back in 2012 when I decided to model it. I made a first attempt using some SIDAM, I guess, coal silos, because it looked fairly close, but I didn't like it very much. I decided I wanted to come back and actually really try to do it. So here I'll show you some of the earlier pictures. That's 72. You notice there's, note the location of the doors and windows because they change. There's also something here I didn't notice, which I probably would have done, but at the extreme left, you'll notice there's a silo, which I could have added, as well as the flap there. And this is very similar to the picture that you just saw of the model itself, with dump trucks and limestone powder all over the place. So Conklin Limestone, in 2012, the silo is gone. And if you notice there, beneath the conveyor belt, there are some H-sectioned steel heavy beams, because the owners had a plan to turn this into a very large warehouse to protect the limestone when it's crushed. And apparently the government at some time changed some of the tax laws so that they no longer could sell profitably the limestone to sweeten New England soil. And this is from Route 146, the view. You've got the headquarters on the left, and you've got only some of what you have seen here. So my first start was, let's see if we could use satellite imagery using Google Earth to gauge the size of the models I wanted to build. And you can see the black where they've allowed, after hundreds of years, the quarry filled up with water. And everything at the top across Wilbur Road is part of their operation. You can't see there are a couple of dark places to the left of the road, and those are probably 18th or 19th century lime kilns. Get a little closer, and you'll start to see there actually are, I found measurements to 100 feet, which is cut off here. And let's just see, they're much closer. And so now I had a chance to measure the various buildings, because I could go on the site and I could walk down, say, the conveyor and get the idea of that. But this was a wonderful check, and it is all using Google. These are some of the weird angles that attracted me to it. And you'll notice that some of the building is bright white, and some you have the faded Conklin limestone, but it was an attempt to create these weird peaks and shapes that made this whole project attractive. Now, this is an example of the main structure, including the changes between 2002 and 12. Earlier, there had been a silo here with a cap on it, and that was, they removed that. But the thing that it didn't occur to me until a little too late was that originally, and I checked with them, the whole outside was not sheathed, but it had that interesting rivet and board structure. And I think it would have been a lot more interesting from this side if I'd actually done that. But it didn't occur to me that that's the way it worked at the time. Now, these are some of the quirky little things. There are 3 conveyor belts. Apparently, they give out they had 3 different grades of how fine the limestone was. So now we come back, and again, we see you've got places to put trucks and a lot of interesting detail. There's a loading dock you can see right behind the oil tank. And what you also have, in addition to the conveyor, you have these weird pipes coming out. Now, if you'll notice at the very, very top, it's enclosed. Originally, it was not enclosed. And I thought it would be easier to build it enclosed, but a lot less interesting. And so I got to see what I could do. And here we are looking from the distance at the typical junk pile. And now you'll see what we saw on the extreme right, that weird oil can over the conveyor. And here's another conveyor over there at the extreme left. Also, you'll notice that the signs have changed, the windows have changed. Frankly, I think one could do virtually anything one wanted. And I would assume that the prototype actually matched it during some 5-year period, because they always seem to be building. And that's this again. So this is the example of the window. And the conveyor belt one had to figure out a way to get to work. And this was the tricky part, because the conveyor ended up at the crushing plant. And looking at it, even when I first walked around, I did not realize that the crushing plant was 2 stories deep, 1 story underground. And so as it turned out, you'll see, I ended up rebuilding it several times until it matched the original to some extent. So first, cardboard mock-up and first construction. So I tried various types of laying out the windows, seeing which one worked.
AHC.
Excuse me? And we have, again, another one of the side, and this looked pretty good. Then I built a second building, and with the loading dock. And as you can see, you don't have to get it perfect. What you do have to do is make sure the angles are right where they count. And so as I started to put it together using styrene, I decided I would try testing it against the cardboard cutouts. And gradually it got built against the cardboard. And in some cases, I'd throw the cardboard away and redo it until it looked more authentic. And these are just you see at the bottom, nut and bolt castings. And this is the garage where we saw the dump trucks. And I wanted to have some of them furnished inside. And that is, of course, you've seen. So modeling the 3 conveyors on the main structure was the next problem. And that really was a little bit tricky. This is from the back. It turns out the structure on what would be the railroad side, you should know, I showed you Wilbur Road. Wilbur Road was filled in and raised up a full story or more when they created Route 146. And the assumption here is one of the many Rhode Island lines went by this on the road. The conveyor belt here, actually, it was something from a Japanese ship model, at some tiny scale, probably used for launching scout planes. And here we're back to this again. And one could go into an enormous amount of detail on this. And I simplified it a bit because it was getting so difficult. Then, of course, there is, for this picture, for some reason, the oil can is missing. But this shows the loading dock to the left. There's if you'll notice, in the upper left corner, there is a man with a lever, and he is going to be releasing the limestone when the next truck pulls in. And you'll notice that this is very heavily rusted. So that was fairly easy to do. And most of the tubing and things of the sort and the pipes seem fairly easy to do. That was not part of the problem of the model. And here is the other side. So here is the beginnings of one of the workshops that is underway. And here is another. This is meant to be very close to the photograph I took here at the beginning. Here we have trains coming along to pick up the limestone. And that again. And here again is our heroic dispenser pulling the lever so that he will release. You'll notice there seem to be pipes sticking out all over the place that wind around and go various places. This is the photograph of the prototype, and you'll notice there is that loading dock, which now seems to be used only for brick and limestone and paving, which seems to have become their specialty because they're still in business. So that, again, was fairly easy to do. Again, their truck versus the one that I used. I did put Conklin limestone by piecing together things on the various trucks we have. And this is another example of some of the weird piping. And in the lower left, right above the pile of, forget what they call it. Anyway, you've got, it was obviously a pump that was functioning at some time. So now the problem was to model the conveyor from the crusher to the warehouse. And at the time I started this, Walthers did not have, as they brought out like a month or two later, a really usable conveyor. So I took some curved plastic part of a Walthers conveyor. And at the very bottom, you can see that little one is used as a small conveyor, but the other two are going to be assembled into the one that goes from the crusher plant. And this shows the crusher, the way of getting the stuff up to the plant. I was also very pleased, if you look down in the corner near the white truck and between the red truck, that I got all of those pipes and with those various tanks, I've got all of that accurate. I was very pleased that that was not as hard as I thought it was going to be. Here we see them dumping this before. And again, just as in the original, they were like chunks of limestone as well as other things before the loading. If we go back to this, we now have to model the crusher. And this proved in many ways a really simple thing, but it meant that it's a really warning. You have to go back and look at something you're modeling a couple of times, because it wasn't until I went back and the Mr. Conklin said, "Oh, just wander all around and make sure you see that." So this is what the crusher looks like. And I think if you look at the extreme left, you'll see something that's rust colored, and that is where the conveyor belt goes. And at first, when I started to build it, because where I was standing in the bushes, I assumed the building ended right below the window, but the angle didn't look right. So here's what it looked like inside: aluminum siding. They had this electric motor to pick up larger pieces of limestone. And the person sits in this protective little cabinet and runs the crusher. And this is another view of it. Obviously, it's not working these days. But the fun part of it was making sure that I had the angles right, and then could actually put some real Conklin limestone there for trucks to dump. And I had discovered by this point, we had to go down a whole story, because it became clear the trucks would start at the left where you see a white truck tractor, and it would come up this hill and then back around and dump the limestone that had to be crushed. This is another view of it, and I think I got the angles right. Didn't put the tree in. And just other views of it. And as you can see, this could be built in a partially ruined state, because it was partially ruined. This is showing the crusher in its sort of primeval form. And you'll notice there are these wooden beams. These actually are the remains of my fine scale miniature sawmill, which was destroyed accidentally when we changed houses. So I found a couple of them. I said, wait a minute, the angle is right. We will reuse these. It'll be the ghost of fine scale miniatures. And this is as I was trying to work out different angles so that it would fit both the profile of the earth as it went down, and also add these extra things. There is also, when I went downstairs, I found all of these switch boxes. So if someone who wanted to be a real bolt counter could have added all of this too. So now the garages and workshop. And I believe the building to the right is the workshop from the stuff I've seen. And it's a fairly large, very simple building. And the modeling charm of it is you can use every bit of scrap and detail that you've got around, because I guarantee you they've got it. And this is from a little distance. Notice one of the garages is open. And one of the things I really enjoyed is I forget the name of the company, JB, I think, made this gas tank, but they actually had a horizontal tank with a vertical pipe and a wire that went into it. And so we could get one of those for the model as well. Some of the junk, like the old boiler, is from Rusty Rail. This is the building completed, looking surprisingly new. And this is it from another angle. And then this is finally in the back, which there wasn't much. I don't think I've quite finished it yet. And here we are pulling back and looking at the limestone quarry. Different aspects. I just put up a background to take some pictures. Here's another look at the conveyor belt and the props and how it comes out of the building in a more or less prototypical way. And this is another view. You can see how long the entire thing is. Is the truck getting ready to dump. The thing that was so strange at first is I did not realize the conveyor came off the right side of the building and not the center. Once that clicked and I looked at the height of the building, things got much easier. And these are just some more pictures of it working. Okay, now I decided, why not create the quarry too? Well, what I did is I took bunches of 2-inch styrofoam and cut them very much to look like limestone quarries I'd found online, which often had these kinds of lines and striations. And there is a road down, and we have nothing much more than a bulldozer or two, a generator, and a ready-made backhoe. So this is looking up. Obviously, I should have photoshopped the thing at the top, but it does give you some size of the entire project. And again, this is using all the kinds of details that you find all around this. And again, note the lime kiln on the left. Mr. Conklin took me across the road and showed me how you could make what their own lime kiln looked like. And I just had some spare plastic around, and I think it was a top or something like a cosmetic bottle or something. And so I made one of them. And instead of putting it far away, I decided I would add that too. And here we see these people working away. And my one diesel is pulling trains, cars into. And here's even more pictures of it. And this is the one thing, I'm not sure if there is a little guardhouse. It's not a guardhouse, it's a weigh house. I think I built it and I built the scale, but I didn't photograph that. Again, more pictures. I think the thing that is so attractive about this are the multiple angles it has. So this is with many thanks to Mr. Conklin, who permitted me to wander around the property. Here he's showing me, and if you look up the tree where it's dark, that's actually the lime kiln. Now, if anybody likes what they have seen, I would be delighted to pass on to an individual modeler or club the Conklin Limestone project. The main buildings, garages, conveyor, and most of the parts of the crusher are all in good shape. I would also include the dump trucks, the bulldozer, and right now I'm modeling 0830. So if someone, that's all folks, so if someone is interested in this, I think you could actually make a very narrow version of this for club layout, where you don't have to have quite as much room coming out to the side. But thank you for inviting me. I hope you enjoyed the saga of building a building that was foolish to start building, but ended up being a lot of fun. Thanks, guys.
George, I have a question.
Yes, Justin?
Those photos you took, was it a functioning plant at the time? Was it in business?
I am not sure. because when I first took the pictures in, I think it was the 70s, I didn't have permission to wander around. And so I didn't get too close. And that meant I didn't go look into the quarry, which I should have. And that would have told me when the quarry had actually been filled.
The reason I asked,
They're still functioning buildings.
if it was a functioning business, they sure as hell didn't spend any money on maintenance.
No,
That's
but they seem to be doing okay in providing slate and paving and things like that. This is a building that went back, I think, to 1648. So it's really sad that it was functioning and however ragged it was going, and then finally it died. Any other questions or comments?
George, did you get your AP prototype award from this, or?
Yes.
You did.
We discussed it and thought, given the history of the road, which had been filled in, and we started to look through various books about Rhode Island short-term railroads that were being considered to be built, everybody decided it was legitimate enough because it fit. I had to change, obviously, the side to put conveyors for the trains.
Who asked that question? Was that you, Pete?
Andy Reynolds asked a question about the prototype.
As AP chair, I did put in for an award for George. He did get his prototype, and George remembers I screwed up after reviewing the SOQ and all the documentation and approved it and sent it on to Bill Brown. He kicked it back because one of the requirements for the AP is that particular award is that you had to have a train essentially on the scene with a caboose, and George hadn't photographed one like that, so we had to scramble quickly to add a caboose and have it photographed and sent it on. But yes, he got the award. So.
I recall that being a very important factor is, for the AP is one, you've got to have your trains in there. And two, you've got to have a building in your prototype that's functioning along a railroad. Because at one point, when I was trying to do a clinic maybe 5 years ago, when I was getting into the AP, I mentioned to Mike Tyler, who's here tonight, and to Peter Watson, I said, gee, I want to do this barn. And they're going, can't do that. I said, what do you mean I can't do that? It's a nice looking barn. I've got the blueprints and what have you. And I had some nice pictures. I had a B&M train running in front of it. And they said, no, it's the barn's got nothing to do with the actual train layout. So I nixed that and ended up with a different type of a prototype. But yeah, you do have to look very carefully at all that AP data and make sure that you cross off all the all the checkpoints.
Yeah, I just screwed up. Simple as that.
George, at what point in the process does the kiln come into play?
The kiln?
Yeah, they dig the lime out of the ground, and then it looks like it goes into the crusher and then up into the building.
I honestly don't know. It seemed to be almost like a totally different process. Because I know in England, there are lime kilns out in the country in the old days. They're often dome shaped, and they don't seem to be associated with ground up limestone. So I don't know the answer to that.
I've heard of lime kilns before myself, but in looking at what you had there, the process looks like they dig it out of the ground, take it into the crusher, and then off the conveyor it goes. So.
Well, that could be.
I know the answer.
Oh.
Tell us.
Okay, when you've got lime, particularly in New England where lime is pretty scarce, there's next to none in eastern Massachusetts, next to none in New Hampshire. That's why Limestone, Maine is named Limestone, and why there's that huge mine out near Adams, Massachusetts. besides selling just the ground up rock to farmers for fertilizer, well, for keeping the
Sweetening
soil from
soil.
getting too sour, you also wind up in the business of selling mortar, because mortar uses the chemical lime, which is just calcium oxide with the water, which is limestone with the water baked out of it. So they have to burn it. And this is the lime that you hear about in stories about terrible battles of the past, how the bodies were covered with lime so that they wouldn't rot and encourage disease and so forth. When you wet that lime, you get slaked lime, but that's a key ingredient in mortar and Portland cement and so on and so forth is raw lime.
So is anybody thinking of taking me up on my offer? There's no hurry.
How,
I
how,
didn't
how
hear
long
your-
did you say it was, George?
I think it's about 5 feet. The entire module that I built was 6 feet. But again, it's not anywhere as wide as it
I
has to
would
be.
suggest if,
One could move the garages in different places.
yeah,
Could you fit it on a 2x4 module?
pardon me?
2x4.
Yeah, a 2 foot by 4 foot standard hub division spec module.
I don't know. I think 2x5, but I could always measure it and you can email me and I'll tell you.
Yeah, that would be good.
The other thing to do would be to shorten the conveyor belt that you could raise it up at a sharper angle, and you could save yourself, 6-8 inches right there.
Yeah. Well, that might be something we could do.
It's HO scale, right?
Yes.
Okay. I've modeled buildings in another scale, in S gauge, and I looked at some of the along the buckwheat and dandelion, which was a very short line that serviced private dairy farms in the 30s and 40s. And it was my in-laws farm that was next to it. And some references that you can use in some rural areas and urban areas are not only the historical society, but also the libraries in the towns be very helpful. And also in the early part of this century, another hobby other than model railroading is saving the postcards that people took in those 30 to 40 years. And you will have many of the structures as they were pristine and new, memorialized on postcards. So checking with postcards and old editions of papers, especially in rural areas, will show the buildings as they were built, because the event of a new building in town was a notable event and was usually recorded by the papers. So looking back in the papers, some of which have been preserved by the libraries and the historic items or historic societies, and then looking at the building, you see it modified after the business was out of it, or a second business came into the building, or it was modified to a domicile. And so therefore you can get the gross measurements off the building with photography, and having a scale on the side of 4 feet long, and then photograph the flat side of the building with the 4 feet measure in the building, and you can have a very accurate print made of the photograph such that you can make it into your scale that you're modeling. So it helps you tremendously in modeling the buildings. And like many educational institutions, both dairying and rural buildings, which started off as a home business, had added buildings and then got a railroad spur to it, and they can make very interesting buildings. And I submit those as sources that you can look at to see the buildings as they were when they were pristine and they were built for the original purpose.
Well, that's interesting, Jeff.
So it's amazing how many buildings were built. And this is in Cherry Valley of New York. And they have been preserved over time, and they've been resurrected into other businesses. And for instance, blacksmith shops and roadside stations where they got cars fixed in the early 20 or 30 years of the 20th century. And those have survived currently, and some of them are 150 to 200 years old. And through their third business, they are staying up and staying active.
Okay. Well, anybody else have any more questions for George on his prototype modeling? George, it certainly seems that I mean, we could be, or I know I'd be interested in trying to create a module that we could show at Big E that you would put together. So, you know, we'll put our thinking caps on. Maybe some other people have some ideas too.
Okay.
So thank you for that presentation. It was very good. You did quite a good job of putting that together. It's amazing.
Andy, that wouldn't have to be on a single module. It could be on 2 modules, so you'd get plenty of room.
Well, you're right about that. We could probably go down there and do a surveillance and see if that would fit. It'd be kind of nice to put that
2
together.
foot by 8 foot, you could certainly model it with the quarry.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
essentially my module.
Yeah.
I bet that building had a railroad spur to it about 120 years ago.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
Is that true?
We're not sure.
Well, you know what? James Van Bolton, our club president, is pretty good at detective work on old tracks. He'd probably be able to sort it out, right, James?
Yeah, just tell me what town. I've got the track charts for the New Haven.
There you go. So George, what town are we looking at?
Let me ask my wife, Ruth.
It's Lincoln or Cumberland.
It's at the border between Lincoln and Cumberland, Rhode Island.
Okay.
And there's
Well, I could look
Road
for it in real
off the
time, but that'll take me a few minutes.
Well, that's something then, James, you'll have to get back to us on.
Okay.
That'd be great. And James does have a very good presentation that he could do at some point for us on the discovering old tracks in the New England area. I saw that back in Waltham there when we did our spring training. It was quite a good clinic. At some point, it'll be time to
Well,
resurrect that.
Andy, it was more focused on what the track was for. In terms of discovering tracks, I could do a short, I could do half an hour or even an hour on resources for identifying what tracks were and what railroads were involved and what books you can have for the history and what things you can just do with digital downloads and Wikipedia.
Well, that sounds like an interesting topic. You
Okay,
could parlay that
well,
onto what George did for us.
yeah, I could just do, that's the kind of thing where I could just do a screen by screen presentation on my computer, but I could also polish it up and make it into a PowerPoint.
Well, that'd be good. Well, thank you again there, George. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody, for coming and listening.
Thank you, George.
It's good to see old and new friends.